I kind of heard what happened to you, but it was too confusing for me. Hey kiddos, thanks very much for joining me for episode 7 of Chronicles in Critiquing, where we're going to review the 4th rebuild of Evangelion movie, Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.01 Thrice Upon a Time, which came out in Japan earlier this year and just launched on Amazon Prime on August 13th. Which is when I'm recording the video. Just finished watching it. If you haven't already, I kind of did like a catch-up video for the first 3, which is Evangelion, each movie in 3 minutes, so check those out first. This is going to be a spoiler review for the 4th movie. Going to quickly kind of go over the plot and then sort of give my thoughts on the entire kind of quadrilogy and this movie in particular. So this movie, the 4th movie, kind of picks up where the 3rd left off. We have Asuka with kind of the Rei clone and Shinji. She had just kind of rescued them. They kind of get picked up by this guy like in a hazmat suit. It winds up it's like one of Shinji's old friends that he went to school with. They kind of wind up being in this village. We kind of find out that the whole entire Earth is like basically polluted except for where they have these kind of like fields, that's these like L fields, I think they call it, that like protect them. And then we kind of spend like kind of a while like in this random village where like the Rei clone, she doesn't have a name, which is a plot point in and of itself, is kind of like learning about living, and Shinji is mostly just wallowing in sadness, which is really all he did for all 4 of these movies. So then eventually the Wunder shows up, which is kind of like the ship of Willy, which is kind of the good guys, and they're fighting Nerve, who is now the bad guys. I guess they're kind of always the bad guy. And they're kind of, Genji's plan is to reactivate Eva Unit 13, which will set off another impact, which will lead to the human instrumentality, project to occur, and obviously Willy is trying to stop them. So Asuka and Mari are kind of the 2 last Eva pilots. They go to fight them, and I guess their plan is to basically mess up the plug entry system so that the Eva Unit 13 can't activate, and Shinji is on the Wunder, but he is kind of locked up so that he can't cause any more trouble. Essentially, this is where the movie starts to kind of really go off the rails, as kind of maybe the quote I chose at the beginning maybe implied. But basically, it winds up that Asuka didn't realize that there's actually 2 pilots for the Eva 13. So even though she kind of blocked one, the other one is still able to be active. And then the Eva 13 unit like reactivates. And then there's like a really big fight between like all the different battleships and like all the different Evas. Blah, 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 blah. All the other Evas are destroyed, blah, 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 blah. Shinji is the only one who could save everybody. He's like, I'm going to pilot the Eva. And then we kind of go through this entire thing again where everyone's like, oh, don't pilot the Eva. But then Masato's like, oh, we should let him actually, Shinji's actually a good dude, and all the things that we've been blaming on him for the last like 2.5 movies are actually not really his fault. Okay, fine. And then like there's a lot of other crazy stuff happens, like the Rei clone, like it winds up she doesn't have some like medicine that she needs, and she just literally explodes. And then like there's the other guy who's like Genji's like kind of like consultant guy, he also explodes. Genji like fuses with like an angel, and he gets like superpowers, and then he travels to like the 4th dimension, and then Shinji like chases after him, and then they fight, and then they talk, and then it's kind of like at the end of the day, Genji's kind of just like, oh, well, it actually winds up that like I was just wanting to get back with your mother, which I think we kind of already knew, but the one person that I shunned was you, and it winds up that like she was part of you all along, and blah blah blah. They kind of have like their bonding moment, and then Shinji sort of like gets, kind of like the infinite powers of like a god, and he's just like, okay, well, I'm just going to use these not to like reset continuity, but I'm just going to basically rewrite continuity and remove the Evas. So he gets this like crazy new like spear, and then they basically just like shish kebab all the Evas and all the angels. And then like Shinji's going to sacrifice himself, but then like his mom is like, oh, I'll do it for you. And then he goes away. And then Mari saves him, and apparently him and Mari got shipped, and they're a couple now. And then they're also like in, I think, the real world. And Shinji also like revives everyone that died. So like Asuka's back and Rei's back. and like some other people are back as well, and they like kind of hint that maybe that it's kind of like an endless circle where the same events, like similar events with the same characters, like replay over and over again, maybe kind of allowing the original Evangelion to be in continuity, and then the movie ends. So I guess my initial thoughts are, okay, is this a good movie? I think it was an interesting movie. I think it was fun to watch. It was 2.5 hours. I think the action was fun. I guess it depends what you want out of the rebuild of Evangelion movies. When I originally found out about the movies, whatever, 10 plus years ago when they were announced, it was kind of presented to me as like, oh, imagine if they redid all of Evangelion, but they kind of knew at the beginning what the ending was going to be, and it would sort of like maybe more logically and smoothly lead into the ending and be better explained, and maybe be a little bit more satisfying when we get there. I don't think this is that movie. I think it's an interesting movie in its own right to kind of see like an alternate version of what would happen to the characters if certain things went differently. But I don't think that it really addresses many of the issues with the original Evangelion, which is mostly that like none of it really makes sense. They introduce like a lot of concepts that are not really explained, and a lot of people's sort of intentions are unclear and maybe perhaps a little inconsistent. Does this movie replace the original Evangelion, or does the rebuild saga kind of replace the original Evangelion? Absolutely not. Is it a nice complement to again kind of see an alternate scenario that could have happened? I think so. Are people going to debate it and find hidden meanings in the hidden meanings? Sure. Are people going to find hidden meanings in things that the producers just put there because they look cool and actually don't have hidden meanings? Probably. As far as movie 4 in particular, I felt like they wasted a lot of time at the beginning. The entire saga is whatever it was, like the first 3 movies are about an hour and a half each, and the last movie is about 2.5 hours, maybe minus 10 minutes for credits or something like that. And they probably spent like 30 or 40 minutes like in this village where like Ray learns how to like plant rice. And just sort of like, okay, like this is interesting. It's interesting to see how the rest of humanity is coping with these like wild events that are happening. But like that seems like maybe more of like a story for a side story manga, or like maybe a 10-minute interlude, not like the focal point of the first like act of the movie. Especially when you just have so much crazy stuff that just sort of gets like shoveled on at the end. I mean, at some point they're just making up like crazy stuff, or it's just like at one point Mari and Shinji, they're like, oh well, we're in the antimatter dimension, but my Evangelion has this special antimatter coating that lets me travel through it. It's just like, okay, fine. Like, is this really important? Is this really necessary? And at the end they just have like all these crazy concepts and all these like this spear and this thing and this Ava and this unit and this thing and the other thing and this gate, and it's just like none of it really makes sense. I could barely remember it. I literally just finished watching the movie like 10 minutes ago. I think another thing, I said this is sort of like an alternate scenario where, how things could kind of happen differently. And to some extent that is true, but to the other extent it's just like, well, if everybody acted a little differently and everyone was nice to Shinji, he still winds up just moping around the whole time and feeling sorry for himself and doesn't really act any differently. And I mean, I understand that's kind of like his character, but it just sort of gets old after a while, especially because, when you have this compressed into like 4 movies, and, I watched all 4 movies the last 4 days in a row, and it's just sort of like, okay, it's just the same thing happening over and over again, right? It's like, how many times have we said, okay, Shinji's gonna fight, okay, then he decides he doesn't want to fight, and then everyone kind of makes a different plan, and then he comes and he does it. I mean, I guess at the end, obviously, Shinji does get an arc where he kind of, learns to grow up, learns how to deal with loss, and finally he goes into battle and doesn't mess up, which is nice. Just maybe we didn't have to have the same exact thing happen like 4 or 5 times before Shinji got to that point. I don't want to sound too down on the movie. It was a good movie. It was an interesting movie. If I was going to rate it out of 10, I'd probably give it like an 8 out of 10 or something like that. It was a fun movie that I enjoyed. I enjoyed watching the entire rebuild of Eva. It's definitely, reignited my interest in Eva. I watched the original and, the 2 movies, Death and Rebirth and End of Eva, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago. So, I wasn't super, I kind of remembered the story. but it was fun to kind of like revisit again. I would certainly recommend it, especially because all 4 movies right now are, free for people who have Amazon Prime. Who knows how long that's going to last, so maybe watch them sooner than later. The Ava rights are kind of notoriously, hard to keep. So who knows how long, we'll kind of all have nearly free access to it, assuming that kind of most people, have Amazon Prime. So yeah, all in all, I would say interesting movie. I don't think it displaces the original Evangelion. I think it has pretty much all the same problems that the original had, but with a new coat of paint. I will say that the action and the animation is really nice. There's some of the CG stuff that I don't really like, but I think I think anime CGI is an issue that's sort of been litigated over and over again, and I don't really want to get into it, too much as part of this review. I would definitely say if you get the opportunity, crank your sound system up, especially for like the movies 3 and 4. The battles are really cool. They're really unique. They're visually unique, and lots of like really weird, like crazy stuff is happening, and that's a lot of fun. But like I said, if you're going in to these 4 movies saying, "Oh, I'm going to watch this, and Evangelion's going to make sense to me now," you are probably going to leave disappointed. Anyway, thanks for watching. This channel typically does a lot of like anime figure unboxings. We have a video where unbox the metal build Evangelion Unit 1, a lot of Gundam stuff as well as some other things. New videos go up every Wednesday. I do put up the occasional review when something interesting comes up, that's typically relevant to robot anime. And I did have a few videos that I put up earlier this week where I'm trying to kind of summarize each of the rebuild movies in 3 minutes to kind of see if I'm able to do that. So those are kind of fun. Anyway, thanks so much, and keep collecting.